There she is. There's SR. All right, get him up here. And as soon as I see you switch over SR, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then you can just let me know when Bridget is here. Did you get the invite, SR? There's Bridget. All right, get her up here. Let me try it. All right. There you go. All right, I see you. All right, and then I switched over to Bridget too. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And if you guys wouldn't mind, post the space and invite everybody in. So basically, where we've gotten this this book is the history of how all of the different national security council documents, the Truman and Eisenhower signing off on the establishment of not only just the different versions of the CIA, but the National Security Council memorandums that authorize them to do evilness. And so we're going to start in chapter 6. Its title is Bitter Fruits, because the bitter tree that they built or grew is going to deliver us equally bitter fruit. And it starts off with talking in 1954 about Eisenhower giving the highest medal for intelligence work, called the National Security Medal, to Kermit Roosevelt, which of course we know he was intimately involved in the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran. And because a lot of this, I'm going to hit the highlights. Just I highlighted a few things in here just to kind of, for new people that are joining us, because we've talked about the overthrow of Mossadegh several different times. So I just want to kind of share with you this guy's version of it, and then we'll move on. So CIA officer Kermit Roosevelt is Teddy Roosevelt's grandson, and he was FDR's cousin. So the DCI at the time is Allen Dulles, the Secretary of State's John Foster Dulles, and the ambassador was L.O.Y. Henderson. So Iran was a covert operation that was done under the guise of the National Security Council 10-2 memorandum, and had to do, as we've talked often before, with the British interest in the Iranian oil. And if you remember, although it's not mentioned in this book, the British oil had the concession, the precursor that's called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which was the precursor to BP. They had the concession in Iran to pump their oil. And the original agreement that the British had arranged with Iran under duress was that they get 86% of the profit, and Iran could keep 14 cents on every dollar of their own oil. And of course, this is under the guise of colonialism, basically. But in fairness to the colonial powers, the oil would have just sat in the ground, because at this point, they didn't have the technology nor the supplies, because they had been a colonial occupied country, to harvest their own oil. And so once you colonize something, then the next thing is putting in the infrastructure. And what I find very interesting about all of this is there isn't, not even an implied, a stated position, and the US has sued foreign countries for this. So think about this. A foreign entity comes in and let's just use us. We get overrun by a foreign country and they enslave us. They colonize us, which is slave, because these people were not nice to their colonies. And we read about in the Congo where they would chop people's hands off for not mining enough uranium in a particular day, or the mines in Chile, or wherever. The rubber trees, they were disfiguring people for not harvesting enough oil or rubber, sorry. So, and then these people, in order to steal all of your resources, comes in and builds an oil well or 2 or 10 or whatever. And then when you get tired of your citizens being murdered and the women being raped and shit being stolen, you rise up, like what happened in Iran. You elect Mossadegh, and he offers 50-50 with them. And the BP guys say, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We like the arrangement that we have. So go pound sand. We don't really care that you're the new prime minister. We're just going to go ahead and do what we've been doing. And so he tells them to leave. And when they don't leave, they, well, when after Mossadegh told them they had to leave, they tried to coup Mossadegh. They were going to kill him. And when that happened, Mossadegh closed the embassy and kicked out all of the staff for the embassy, and basically annexed the oil company. Now, today, like I said, back then and today, they being the colonial powers, want to be compensated for the infrastructure. Now, they built that infrastructure with slave labor from the local people. They paid to ship in the steel, but they've been more than compensated for that out of the profit of 86 cents of every dollar going to that company. But like in Chile, when they was kicking the mines out, they wanted to be compensated. In Arbenz and in Guatemala, Nicaragua, when they wanted United Fruit out, they demanded millions and millions of dollars. And United Fruit basically had planted bananas. They didn't, they had upgraded the harbor for their own purposes and put in a rail line, not the original rail line, which was going to go through the whole country. And that's what they promised in order to get the concession and all of the land that they got. They only built a railroad that they needed to the harvest area and back to the port. So they didn't uphold their end of the bargain. But then when they got kicked out, they wanted tens of millions of dollars for the quote unquote infrastructure. And if you think about that, that's ridiculous, because like in Nicaragua, they were paying people like 86 cents a day for labor. So again, they're making billions of dollars off of these people and then demand to be compensated when they're kicked out. The same thing happened with ITT in the telephone system in Chile. So, and there has been legal precedents set where the US will sue a company or a country for not compensating, like they did in Venezuela, and they will win in a US court. And then they will take that win in the US court, which is rigged, to the IMF and the World Bank to starve the people in Venezuela when they got tired of getting ripped off from the US oligarchs or wherever they happen to be. So this has played out through history over and over and over again, where the whole purpose in going there, we have plenty of oil, by the way. We didn't have to go to Nicaragua. We didn't have to go to any of these other places. The same thing with the mines in Panama. We have copper. we're not harvesting it, because the mining companies do not want to harvest or mine here because they have to abide by union labor. They have to abide by fix the ground when you're done and all of the high standards we have. So we set these high standards that drove the mining out of the United States to these other places that don't adhere to any of those rules. So the mining company is making, again, tens of billions of dollars when we don't even have to be there. And if they kick them out, the CIA will go down and overthrow them, even though we have the resources here to satisfy our own needs. So that's something that everybody needs to understand. So we set up a system here, and they did it. The same oligarchs did it because they don't want to be here, because they won't get a higher profit if they do it here, because we have things like minimum wage and stuff like that. So they paid the lobbyists to implement the regulations that then gave them the justification to go elsewhere and source these materials. So it's just one big self-licking ice cream cone. All right. So the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company is what's at stake. And Mohammad Mossadegh, the prime minister, there's some, as he's taken office, because they didn't really want him to be the new prime minister, there was some violence, and it was religious violence that happened as he's coming to during the election process. So there was a bill for the government to take over the oil company that eventually gets passed, and the British government wanted the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company to stay, so they alerted the 16th Parachute Brigade in Cyprus, and they were going to obviously come up and do something about it. So the British then decides that because they weren't able to do anything about it, they're going to organize a boycott so that no one will buy Iranian oil, no matter who they hire to come in and harvest the oil. So now that there's basically a standoff at this point, we send over W. Averell Harriman. Yeah, from Brown Brothers Harriman. And a guy by the name of Paul Nitze, Nitze. They too fail. They make absolutely no headway at all with Mossadegh, because Mossadegh is insisting on a fair deal. So the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company has a working relationship with the local in Iran intelligence organization called SIS, which is really interesting because their SIS in Pakistan next door is ISI. Just a little funny note. So soon the British start demanding that someone take action against the quote unquote theft of their oil company. So after their failed coup happens, they contact the CIA, and Kermit Roosevelt goes over to London and sits down with the MI6 guys to decide what they're going to do. At the time, the chief of intel at the CIA was Walter Bedell Smith. So Smith, who had worked for Eisenhower as his chief of staff during World War II, knows all of the players. And of course, we have John Foster Dulles of Secretary of State. We have Allen Dulles as the he was the deputy director at the time and then moves up into the directorship. So there is, let's see, another delegation of that is, let's see, that goes to Iran. That was British Chief Intel Sir John Sinclair. And of course, the Dulles had worked with John Foster at the Wall Street firm Sullivan and Cromwell, and their law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, represented the Anglo-Iranian oil company in the United States. So they were actually their lawyers. So now you just, this is so rich. You have a company whose lawyers are embedded in the US government, one in charge of intel and one in charge of the State Department, who wants a coup to happen in Iran to get their oil company back. And so literally their attorneys are embedded in the government and going to overthrow the government of, they're embedded in the US government. They're going to overthrow the Iranian government for the guys that was just their clients before they walked into their offices. So you just can't make this up. So Mossadegh appealed to the US government after their tiff with London, and actually contacts Eisenhower and asks for help with the oil wells, not knowing what the real deal is, and also asks for foreign aid. Well, we know, because Eisenhower's on the take for these people too, which is why we got the two Dulles brothers working for him, that no help is going to come, no financial help. But he's going to send some people over there. He just happens to send Kermit Roosevelt to Iran in order to overthrow the government. That operation, if you want to do any research on your own, is called Operation Ajax, AJAX. So he's put in charge of it. And Kermit entered Iran under a false identity. He met with the Shah, and he is there on behalf of both Winston Churchill and Eisenhower. And he has at least 5 other CIA agents with him. And then, of course, they have all of the people working with them inside of Iran that the British had basically co-opted during their tenure there in the oil industry. So Operation Ajax focused on getting the Iranian army to back the Shah, who basically had just been deposed when they decided they were going to have a democratic election. You know, that thing that everybody says they want that they don't really ever want because they screw with it all the time. And if they don't screw with it enough and somebody they don't like wins, then they just overthrow them. So that's Mossadegh. So basically they have 200,000 armed forces, and they have about 50,000 in their national police force. And keep in mind that their national police force was set up by Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. while he was over in Iran. It was called the Savak, S-A-V-A-K. And it was very loyal to the West and not to Mossadegh. So nobody's going to be there to help Mossadegh except the Soviet Union. And then, of course, as soon as he reaches out to the Soviet Union after everybody else has turned him down, he's labeled a communist. And there are actually declassified CIA documents that says unequivocally that Mossadegh was not a communist. He had no communist inclinations at all. So You have the former Iranian commander by the name of Zahedi, Zahedi, and he is the one that Kermit ends up working with. And they draft a decree that has the Shah dismissing Mossadegh, even though technically that wasn't allowed. Minor technicality. And it just so happens, as with all of these instances, Alan Dulles is out of town because that's their quote unquote plausible deniability. So he's on vacation in the Swiss Alps. Well, it just so happens that the Iranian princess, Ashraf, Ashraf, and the US ambassador to Iran at the time, Lloyd Henderson, shows up mysteriously at the exact same resort. And so they basically convince her to tell the Shah that he has to fire Mossadegh, which then he does. And the Shah then leaves town, and the coup begins. So you have basically what they did was they paid a bunch of their cops and army people and agitators in the streets to go out and basically create a big fuss like they do now. It's the exact same scenario. And then they eventually move them over, the army people, into where Mossadegh's presidential palace or prime minister palace, whatever you call it. And he had gotten a tip off because there were still loyal people in the army that they were coming, and he escaped out the back, and they basically burnt the entire thing down thinking he was in it originally. And so he survives the assassination attempt, but they arrest him and he's under house arrest for the rest of his life. So it says the big winners were the Shah and his men, because they ended up with absolute power for the next 26 years. And let's see, as the cost to American taxpayers for the foreign aid, Eisenhower approved $45 million. This is in 1952 and 3. $45 million. And soon after the Zahedi cabinet took office. And so basically the Shah is going to be the royalty there. And then they have the stooge, which is the bought puppet, sitting as the head of the government. And it says the flow neared $1 billion before the end of Zahedi's administration. $1 billion to a country that we just overthrew so that we could have their oil. And what happened is Mossadegh offered the Anglo-Iranian oil company 50-50. So because we had to come save them, the Standard Oil went into basically the arrangement that was worked. And this came out of the Eisenhower administration. Is our payback for that wasn't going to go back into the coffers of the taxpayer dollars. It was going to go into Standard Oil. And the Standard Oil, there were like 3 different subsidiaries, but they're all still owned because it was just a shell game to quote unquote break up big oil. So Standard Oil comes in and enters into a partnership with the Anglo-Iranian. And all they ended up at the end of the day, after all these dead bodies and the coup and overthrowing a democratic government, was 50%, what they were offered by Mossadegh, because Standard Oil took the rest of it. So, and they still eked out this tiny little bit for Iran, but the Shah didn't care because he was getting paid through back doors. So that's kind of the irony in all of these stories, is that the only entity that wins in any of these is the big companies, the oligarchs, the international syndicate, because that's whose behalf they were, all of this is done on, not ours. They use our name. Not a single thing is done for us at all. So it says Iranian oil production resumed again in 1954 under an international agreement, which of course included Standard Oil from then on. Kermit Roosevelt returned to Washington as the assistant director of the Directorate of Plans, working directly for Wisner. And, Wisner's the guy that runs all the covert operations. And it says Roosevelt directed the political action staff and supervised the component's field operations. He tried to use a White House debriefing to critique Operation Ajax. Quote, "If we, the CIA, are ever going to try something like this again, we must be absolutely sure that the people in the Army want what we want. If not, you had better give the job to the Marines," unquote. Roosevelt wrote later that John Foster Dulles did not want to hear any such advice. Roosevelt was offered a command of a very similar project in Central America very soon afterwards. He was offered to be in charge of what's going to happen in Guatemala, basically right after that, but he declined going down there. It says the government there was, of course, another democratically elected government that was elected in 1950 with 50% of the vote in a free election. President Jacobo Arbenz Guzman. And he was very, very popular because he was doing the agricultural reform and basically taking the people's land back that had been stolen from them through corrupt government deals to United Fruit. And so, and by the way, United Fruit's lawyers, Sullivan and Cromwell. So United Fruit is the largest landowner in Guatemala, holding 550,000 acres, which they grew bananas on, but they only grew bananas on a very small portion of that, like 20% of it, 25 at the most. But they didn't want any competition. So they, quote unquote, bought the rest of that land in order to keep other people from being competitors of theirs, which basically meant all of the Guatemala was I wouldn't say it was well off, but they had, most families had historical farmland growing coffee. They were basically all kind of middle class, lower middle class, because coffee was in such high demand. And they would kind of pool it like a co-op and sell it into the United States or wherever. And they were, for lack of a better term, fat, dumb, and happy until United Fruit showed up. And then basically what they did was they would go in and buy government officials. And once they corrupted the government officials, they would get them to go confiscate people's land for, alleging that they had done something wrong, like built, dammed up water or whatever. There's so many stories that they used, none of which were true, in order to get this land pennies on the dollar. Not only that, then they would go in there and create havoc too, where then no one would want to come into that area. There would be no tourism, blah, 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 blight, introducing water shortages so that their coffee harvest was interrupted, blah, 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 interrupt shipping. They just harass the hell out of them. And that's how they end up with all of this land. And so the Guatemalans offered compensation on a long-term bond to pay them back for the amount of land value that they had been paying taxes on. And United Fruit said, no, we want way more than that. And um, the president, Arbenz Guzman, said, "No, no, we're going to give you what you've been paying taxes on." So they were pissed. So lawyer Thomas Colquhoun, who was the I love this. He was the lawyer for Civil Air Transport, which means he's a lawyer for CIA front companies. And he is also the lawyer for United Fruit because, Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles is a little busy right now. They're pretending to be in the government. Tommy Corcoran acted as a liaison in 1953, selling a scheme for action to the CIA. He met with the Undersecretary of State at the time, which was Walter Bedell Smith. Yes, he was also CIA. And although one account of the Guatemala operation alleges that it was approved by the National Security Council Special Group Review in August 1953, in fact, it is probable that ad hoc procedures were used like those for Operation Ajax. By the fall, however, definite action was in the wind and the CIA was getting ready. The timing of the decision to undertake the Guatemala operation reveals a link between Guatemala and Iran. At the time the Guatemala situation was under consideration, the short-term success of Ajax was very impressive. Kim or Kermit Roosevelt noticed a gleam in John Foster Dulles's eyes at the White House briefing and surmised that something similar was going on elsewhere. Even the code word people seemed to allude to Iran when they designated the Guatemala effort was Operation Success. So they had Operation Ajax. This is called Operation Success, like it's going off of the success of the Iranian operation. In this case, the CIA saw no possibility of foreign intervention. Yet there were definite advantages to be had in cooperating with United Fruit, which of course has already pulled off several coups on their own before the CIA was even set up. Alan Dulles was the executive agent for Operation Success. He kept in close contact with planning and execution with two personal assistants, one, Tracy Barnes, two, Richard Bissell Jr. Barnes had been in the OSS in Switzerland working for Dulles. He later worked for Gordon Gray on the psychological strategy board that we talked about a couple of chapters ago. He had been moved over to the CIA as an aide to the DCI. Bissell, Bissell, had been an economist by trade and came to the CIA from the Ford Foundation. Together, they coordinated the Washington end of the planning. Frank Wisner's task as deputy director of plans was to select who's going to be the field commander. Roosevelt not interested in the job, so Wisner got Alan Dulles to call the Korea station chief, who was Army Colonel Albert Haney, Haney. And he came up in our story when we were talking about the aftermath or during and the aftermath of the Korean War when we covered Korea. In Korea, Haney had done the first-rate job of setting up all of the CIA guerrilla units. Operation Gladio in Korea. That was Haney's job. And since there was going to definitely be a paramilitary aspect to Guatemala, he was the perfect person. So again, how are these people in the military leading all of these CIA operations if they're actually in the military? Because that doesn't happen. So Haney, of course, accepts on the spot, and he gets posted to what at the time was going to be the training facility at Opelika, Florida. The same base that Felix Rodriguez ended up at, and all of the Cuban exiles were trained to go into all of the death squads, like in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. Yeah, So, same place. Training terrorists on U.S. soil. Not the first time, not the last time. He exercised general supervision over CIA station chiefs in all of the nations surrounding Guatemala because they're going to do to Guatemala exactly what they did to Nicaragua. Nicaragua was surrounded by Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and they basically set up terrorist training camps, as we know they do, around the border, and then they pounce. At the time, Nicaragua has the Somozas, which are basically CIA sponsored, US sponsored, United Fruit sponsored dictators in place in Nicaragua because the Sandinistas has not come back to power yet. And so they set up shop. One of Haney's problems was that the CIA's own Western Hemisphere division, its director, like Haney, was a counterintelligence man, but he originated from the FBI, not the Army. Joseph Caldwell King's FBI experience dated to when the agency had been responsible for all intelligence operations in Latin America. Did you know that? That they were responsible for foreign intelligence before the CIA set up? Within the Directorate of Plans and the Western Division, they still had formal control over the stations Haney was supposed to use. King, who was less affectionately known as his nickname, Jesus Christ. Not kidding. Because he was very, in charge of everything. He privately thought Operation Success was not going to work and was not at all thrilled about it. So, more familiar with the area than Haney, who had been a Far East guy, King called the task force chief into his office and suggested a meeting with Tommy Corcoran. Haney did not like the idea and was blunt about it. If you think that you can run this operation without United Fruit, King said, you're crazy, because his idea was to include United Fruit in it because United Fruit had done many of these. Wisner and Allen Dulles, however, backed Haney and gave him a free hand. In the end, United Fruit itself decided not to go in on Operation Success. If the operation failed, they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And that, by the way, is the whole purpose of the CIA, so these corporations don't have to get their hands dirty anymore. I guess the author didn't get the memo. That's the whole purpose of the CIA, to use our money to do their dirty work. Well, that and drug money. All right. So basically, the CIA tells them that they don't want to be involved. They don't want to be informed as to like everyday updates. Corcoran is retained as the go-between between United Fruit executives and the CIA. Despite Haney's and United Fruit's preferences, in at least one respect, the CIA was carrying on with United Fruit's program. That is, they had already been one CIA paramilitary effort aimed at Guatemala, and that one involved United Fruit. Under a code named Fortune, in the last several months of the Truman administration, CIA passed weapons to United Fruit intended for anti-Arbenz rebels. We're talking about Operation Gladio style units. Operation Fortune proved abortive and was halted. But the cast of characters that were involved were all still there and trained. One of them was Taco Somoza in Nicaragua, Honduran officials, and others in the surrounding area. Haney soon had his task force and a plan to go. The chief of political action, the CIA euphemism for psychological warfare, was E. Howard Hunt. Like how he shows up in all of these. He had previously worked in Albania. Yeah, we found him there. Under Hunt, Haney brought in David Atlee Phillips, an amateur actor and journalist. He was recruited in Chile 4 years before that to run black propaganda radio stations. On the paramilitary side, Haney had brought in William A. Robertson Jr. He was a CIA trainer in Saipan. And remember, Saipan is basically like what we found in Sardinia. It's a CIA training island. And he had worked for Haney when Haney was in Korea. So we're going to have to go back and do a look at Saipan and find out exactly how extensive that was, because once we started looking at Sardinia, it was like, holy crap, over the top. All right. And so saying that he was Haney's deputy in Korea and enjoyed going along on the behind the lines mission with the CIA guerrillas, where they were setting up Gladio units on the northern side in Korea. Also on the team was former Berlin station chief Henry Heckscher, Hecksher, whose professionalism and skill was already legendary in the CIA. He would operate undercover in Guatemala to supply frontline reports. The plan itself was carefully created in a mix of military and psychological strategies. A rebel liberation army would be formed and trained in neighboring Nicaragua. There would be covert air support. The rebels would invade Guatemala, and intervention by the U.S. Armed Forces was not to be done. So they set up a propaganda campaign for the black radio station in hopes that the Arbenz government would get panicked and basically they wouldn't have to do much fighting. The U.S. Embassy in Guatemala would contribute unremittent diplomatic pressure on Arbenz throughout the process. And that's why all of the ambassador's staff are in on all of these coups. Every coup that happens cannot happen without the ambassador being involved. The Salvadoran officials refused to allow the invasion to be mounted from their country. The final plan based the rebels in Honduras. From there, the main force would march overland and capture the railroad station in Zacapa, while several loads of boats would make it to the Caribbean ports. Both places, plus Guatemala City, would be bombed by an air component of the CIA. The groundwork was prepared as quietly as possible. An unenthusiastic station chief in Guatemala was replaced early by a guy by the name of John Doherty, Doherty. Appointed ambassador to Honduras in late 1953 in a move that may have been encouraged by Corcoran was Whiting Willauer. Whiting is his first name, and Willauer, Wilauer. So, and you'll never guess where we got him from. He was the senior manager at the Civil Air Transport, the CIA front airline. So, he had reported, he's been mentioned several times in correspondence about the Civil Air Transport and talking with Claire Chennault, who we know, Flying Tigers, Civil Air Transport, all part of that in Southeast Asia. So later participants would acknowledge that if some of the Guatemala rebel aircraft had been shot down, I found this fascinating, and I'm definitely going to do more research on it, that the pilots would have been speaking Chinese. Now, why would that be? That would be because they had a heavy presence of Taiwanese, not Chinese. because at the time in the 50s, they're calling what we call today Taiwan and Chiang Kai-shek's KMT military Chinese, because the US was recognizing it as being kind of the government in exile because they didn't recognize Mao. So they were using extensively Taiwanese pilots. And where did those come from? Oh, William Pauly, who had the Curtiss aircraft franchise in Southeast Asia and supplied Taiwan, not just with pilots, but with the training to go along with it. Yeah, same guy, same people, just using them in Latin America because they're all part of the World Anti-Communist League, which was used more as a command in order to execute these operations than it ever was just a normal anti-communist NGO. So Operation Success entered the execution phase in early 1954 when the political action campaign started. Dave Phillips checked material for the radio broadcast during a visit with Henry Hexer, who posed as a German businessman. American ambassador John Purifoy set the tone, and I'll spell his name, Puerifoi, in January 1954, when he told a reporter for Time magazine that, quote unquote, public opinion in the United States might force actions to prevent Guatemala from falling to the dreaded communists, because there's no communists there. All right. In recruiting a rebel leader, which usually ends up being the next president of the CIA installed dictator, the CIA went first to the candidate who was defeated by Arbenz in the 1950 election, Miguel Fuentes. He had already been approached by United Fruit, but was not interested because the United Fruit was already very busy down there. Then America turned to Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas. He had been in exile since the failure of his revolt staged in 1959 to overthrow the government. Joining the CIA, Castillo Armas issued a declaration from Honduras in December 1953 that he was going to liberate Guatemala from that dreaded democratically elected government. When the Guatemalan police began an investigation, they came across correspondence among Armas, a guy by the name of Diadaris, and Somoza, the guy over in Nicaragua, about their plans and referring to their friends up north, which was the CIA. This material was released to the Guatemalan press in January. The charge that the Americans had a role in his plans was termed absolutely ridiculous without any basis in fact at all by the State Department. At that moment that they're denying it, there's a barn in Honduras that was housing the clandestine radio Voice of Liberation, or the Black propaganda operation that was already beginning. And they had 170 Guatemalan exiles training in CIA camps in Nicaragua and where? The Panama Canal Zone. You know that army base down there where School of Americas was located, that they trained assassins and paramilitary people? Yeah, there. Later, Guatemala police made arrests based on what they learned from the Castillo Armas documents. Eisenhower refers to these actions as a mass arrest reign of terror. So in America, our government was telling our people that the government of Guatemala had executed a reign of terror for arresting the people that are trying to overthrow the democratically elected government. Okay. That's why you can't fucking believe any of these people in government ever, 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 because they're all liars. All of them. It just galls me to no end. And this is Eisenhower that's doing this. In his book, he doesn't just like say it to the media, and it is reported in the news that he says this. He actually wrote it in his memoirs, like we were never going to find out. That's how arrogant these son of a bitches are. We're never going to find out that we couped the government in Guatemala. So he writes it down in his book that they were terrorists. Just absolutely crazy. All for trying to defend their democracy. One action by the Arbenz government did threaten to derail everything. The Guatemalans turned to Czechoslovakia to buy 2,000 tons of arms because, again, they were cut off from everybody. Washington learned of this move when an agent in Poland reported the loading of weapons aboard a freighter. The ship turned out to be Swedish vessel Alfhem, Alfhem, which eluded several attempts at interception before they reached Guatemala. The attempted interdiction was like a scandal. And it basically led to the first military action of Operation Success. CIA paramilitary man William Rip Robertson wanted to go to the port city with frogmen and sink the Swedish ship with explosives. Yes, that's the CIA. But Washington said no. Instead, he sent a party from Armas's Liberation Army to blow up the railroad tracks outside of the port. Robertson led the team himself and laid the explosives on the track. But it just so happens it rained and it didn't work. The CIA team then opened fire on one of the trains, but it didn't stop. One anti-Arbenz soldier died in the ambush, like one of the U.S. paramilitaries. But as it turned out, that was all for nothing, because the Czechs had basically sent them old, nasty, non-functional munitions that they couldn't use at all. So, despite Eisenhower calling Arbenz a communist, the actual communists in Czechoslovakia wasn't actually his friend, because they didn't even take care of him. They screwed him too. So, the useless weapons from Czechoslovakia enabled Eisenhower to come out with his infamous, "Oh my God, Arbenz is a communist." In May 23rd, the Navy received orders to conduct surveillance of all of the Guatemala ports. The next day, Eisenhower told a party of congressional leaders that he was ordering the Navy to actually stop any suspicious ship, which, by the way, is illegal. Alfhem herself was intercepted on the return voyage and escorted to Key West for a thorough search. The Dutch government lodged a complaint after a Dutch ship was boarded in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Later, it was decided that no more ships were going to be boarded, because that's literally a violation of international law. Not that we care about that kind of stuff, because we're doing assassinations and overthrowing governments. Operation Success was already in its final stage. The Black radio began broadcasting on May 1st. They had cartoons, leaflets, pamphlets, dropping all of that crap like they always do. And the Latin press was infiltrated by the US Information Agency. So they're writing articles down there, all lies. And they had, let's see, Arbenz made his invasion on June 18th, riding in old vehicles with about 140 soldiers with him. But they expected, for some strange reason, even though they had a democratically well-liked president, that there was going to be this mass swelling of people that was going to rise up to overthrow the government that they had just elected. But there was none. So then all they had left, because there's no mass swelling of resistance or anything else, is an air force. So they're going to start dropping bombs and killing people when all else fails. So Whiting Willauer's Air Force that he's supposed to be assembling is going to be, that's like the linchpin of the whole thing at this point, because everything else failed. It had run a number of bombing and leaflet missions, like with the propaganda, the first day of the invasion. A raid that caused some damage involved a hand grenade and a stick of dynamite that basically was dropped. Another pilot missed his target, ran out of gas, and crash landed over the Mexican border, where he was held by local authorities. The CIA operation could have been exposed right there, as it was an American national by the name of William Bell, Beall, who had been taken into custody. But the agency managed to get him released quietly, and 2 other planes were also hit with small arms fire from the ground that could not be repaired. Allen Dulles got the bad news in a telephone call from Al Haney on June 20th. The rebel Air Force could not operate more than 4 of his planes at any one time. Losses made the entire operation formidable. So they needed a supply of high explosive bombs, and they needed the pilots to basically be more effective. And they wanted the pilots to drop smoke bombs first so that their bombing runs could be not as dangerous, because for some reason the people are a lot better prepared at shooting these planes than they expected. They even took to dropping empty Coke bottles because it made like they were like water, and it made like a big explosion, and they wanted people to think that they were actually bombs. Haney reported that Nicaraguan dictator Taco Somoza had offered 2 of his P-51 fighter bombers to replace the rebel losses, but only if the U.S. would itself replace Nicaragua's aircraft. This sounded like a simple expedient until the State Department for Latin America insisted they get an answer from the president. Eisenhower met with Allen and Foster Dulles at the White House the afternoon of June 22nd, and Frank Holland, the state assistant secretary, entered the office carrying several legal big stacks of paper. The president turned to Allen Dulles. "What do you think Castillo's chance is without aircraft?" Dulles said 0. "Suppose we supply the aircraft," Eisenhower said. "What would the chances be?" 20%. So Ike agreed to supply aircraft. The planes from Somoza was going to go into action the next day, and then they basically were going to replace them from the United States, so that there was no U.S. aircraft being used, but ones that were painted with Nicaraguan paraphernalia on them. Okay, so mainly because of the psychological effect, the bombing led to a huge success on the ground, because it scared the bejesus out of everybody there, as it normally would. So the CIA also, let's see, the situation was not helped by the fact that John Foster Dulles had, let's see, had a tiff with the foreign minister of England because of the boarding of the ships. Well, then the CIA bombed and sank a British merchant ship. This ship was called Springfjord, which had sailed from Pacific port of San Jose, and Somoza feared the vessel carried gasoline to Guatemala to fuel their trucks and airplanes, to attack Nicaragua to exact revenge. The Nicaraguan dictator turned to Rip Robertson, the top CIA officer at the airfield, and demanded that the ship be stopped. Robertson asked Apalaca for orders, but his cable arrived at 2 a.m, and Al Haney and Tracy Barnes refused permission and told Robertson to use some other method, like frogmen or something undetectable, plausible deniability. So Somoza's pissed, and he tells Robertson, if you use my airfields, you're working for me and you will follow my orders. Robertson, who had also been disappointed by the orders to not take care of it, gave in and ordered up the fighter bombers. 15 minutes out of base, the planes found the ship and hit her with a 500-pound bomb on the second pass. No one was killed or wounded by the bomb. The ship sank slowly enough for everybody to get off. It only had coffee and cotton on it. It destroyed all relationships temporarily with the British embassy and left egg on the face of, not that they cared, of Frank Wisner and everybody else. So eventually the US taxpayers ends up paying $1.5 million to Lloyd's of London to reimburse them for us sinking the ship. So that didn't do a whole lot. And the Guatemalas finally felt pushed to the point where the army began to consider ousting Arbenz. The president was given an ultimatum and he finally resigned because they knew in Guatemala that unless they got rid of their duly elected president, the US was never going to stop attacking them. So he goes to the Mexican embassy and asks for political asylum. Despite the success of the overall thing, they did have after actions in which Robertson was branded a cowboy and Allen Dulles fired him. In a 1966 interview with the New York Times, Richard Bissell conceded that the action went beyond the established limits of policy. We're just going to overthrow a government. We don't really want to sink ships. Like that's some false moral imperative there. It just is ridiculous. Okay. The CIA thought it had done rather well on the Iranian and Guatemalan, so well, in fact, that within months of the agencies already planning more. And Eisenhower memoir employs only the thinnest of disguises in discussing these two crises, calling CIA agents in Tehran representatives of the US government and saying that Guatemala, that the US had to do something, because it was a communist after all. Allen Dulles is even more forthright in his book called The Craft of Intelligence. This is a quote. In Iran, a Mossadegh, and in Guatemala, an Arbenz had come to power through the usual processes of government and not by any communist coup, as in Czechoslovakia. Neither man at the time disclosed the intention of creating a communist state. When this purpose became clear, support from the outside was given to loyal anti-communist elements in the respective countries. In the one case with the Shah supporters, in the other to a group of Guatemalan patriots. In each case, the danger was successfully met. Now, this is the reason why we're so ignorant. So I've read Alan Dulles' book, and back when I read it, which was in Air War College, sounds completely plausible. It's a fucking lie. I just told you what happened. Arbenz was not a communist, neither was Mosaddegh. But these people lie in these books and say they are, and then that's what gets recorded as official history. Eisenhower's a liar. Alan Dulles is a liar. John Foster Dulles is a liar. And so is anybody that's ever worked for the CIA, to include the ones today, by the way. So basically, there was no apparent room in the world for indigenous nationalism. Nowhere. If you didn't roll over and play dead for the international syndicate, you were going to be overthrown. The CIA was unleashed in the name of democracy, but democracy, as defined by American foreign policy, came to mean governments that followed pro-American policies. Not pro-American, pro-international syndicate and these international oligarchs. No election occurred in Iran between 1953 and 1960, and therefore parliament existed at the pleasure of the Shah. In Guatemala, after 1954, the republic was completely abolished. A new constitution was adopted in 1965, but immediately suspended, were basically declared martial law and taken over by military rulers. In fact, the excesses of the ruling oligarchs became such that the Americans themselves, in the time of Jimmy Carter, halted all foreign aid because of the death squads and gross human rights abuse. And by the way, Jimmy Carter is the only president that did that. Congress tried to do it during the Reagan administration, but Reagan ignored him and did it illegally. We hold Reagan up as an icon, and we spit on Jimmy Carter. In both the cases of Iran and Guatemala, the U.S. received credit from the world public opinion for creating dictatorships and not democracies, which we've done all over the world. So while the fruit may prove bitter in the long run, the Eisenhower administration was encouraged to keep going. So that's that one. We'll come back tomorrow with Create and Exploit Troublesome Problems, which is our next chapter. And it has a couple little interesting surprises in it. So anyway, that's it for today's book club session. So if anybody wants to come up and grab a mic, please do. What happened to Miss Bridget? And I don't know, the floor.
Listener, Colonel.
Huh?
I see Bridget as a listener.
I know. I just gave her the mic again. She must have, her co-host must have fell out. I sent it to her. Let's see.
Hi there, Colonel. Can you hear me?
I can.
Nice to meet you, and thank you for having me on your space. I just wanted to bring up a few different things. So I apologize. I could not get on. It kept kicking me off for some reason, probably a DDoS attack or something. Clowns love that kind of stuff. I don't know why, but they find it funny, humorous, really. But I wanted to ask you a few questions. One of them being the war against its own people. The CIA seems to be a counter agency against its own people. Would that be kind of like a fair assessment?
So I don't know. That's not what I refer to it as, and I'll tell you why. The CIA, prior to there being a CIA, were lawyers and businessmen, economists, college professors that did this kind of work on behalf of what we refer to as the international syndicate, and that is all of the large businesses, the Rockefellers, the bankers, the blah blah blah. So though the oligarchs employed all of those people. They paid for the studies for the professors at the universities and that they got rich off of. They hired Sullivan and Cromwell. They hired the economists, so they were all beholding to them, and they also basically pay for all of the representatives and senators and the president. So the fact that after World War II they took the risk in doing it the way they had been doing it because they had no government protection is some of them ended up in jail. Some of them ended up hung in foreign countries because they were caught as spies. But if you put them in the CIA and then you embed the CIA in embassies, you get diplomatic immunity. So they created this illusion that there's actually a CIA. There's never been a CIA. They've never collected intelligence. They've always been a paramilitary capability to go around the world on behalf of oligarchs and international syndicate in order to overthrow governments and basically be thugs. They're mafia called a CIA. And so they have never worked for the people. They have always worked for these people, both before and after World War II. So that's the way we look at it.
Thank you for defining that, because I don't think a lot of people understand their very origins, and a lot of people are kind of misguided. And I really appreciate you taking the time to explain this to not only myself but for everyone. You're very, very brave, and you're very, very intelligent. And I as
or stupid.
No, but as I listen to your programs more and more, we're very much aligned in the same ways, in the same way of thinking. I personally, the CIA, their ultimate goal would be, like you said, working for the corporate or the juggernaut behind it, the cabal. And that's really how I see where their origins really are. And they have made a huge mess of humanity. And I hope President Trump and some of the other gentlemen, Radcliffe, clean it up. It needs to be cleaned. These people are murderers, and they use mayhem and chaos in order to control and dislodge governments at will. And it's got to stop. The killing has to stop. Where do you see the Trump administration going with the CIA?
Well, I mean, obviously, I don't have a crystal ball. I think the fact that that he nominated Radcliffe, who obviously was on the inside of a CIA operation called Russiagate and saw what happened from the inside in the House, he's probably going to be more savvy, and he's definitely an outsider. But the last time we had an outsider was during the Carter administration, when they fired almost 1,000 of them. And that kind of came back to haunt us because all they did was create an outside entity called the Enterprise, hang out there until Reagan came in, and then they were right back in. So as far as I'm concerned, and I've said this to everybody in here, they've heard it before, is that to me, the only job Radcliffe has is to go in that building, turn the lights out, lock the door, and put a for sale sign there and every other facility that the CIA is in. Tell them all, you'll have a severance package. We're done.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And the final question with regards to the CIA. I was listening to a gentleman, and please forgive me, I forgot his name, but he was a whistleblower from the DOD, and he gave testimony in front of the congressional hearings about 2 to 3 months ago. And he said this, he said, it was our job when we were tapped by our boss from the DOD and he got his orders from somewhere higher. And he said multiple 3-letter agencies were to obstruct the incoming Trump administration and its movement. And then one of the congressmen said, movement, like what, people in the movement? He said, that's correct, they're influencers. And so it struck me right then and there as to really who was the third person sitting right next to me on my computers as I was making my YouTube videos. And funny things started to happen and I couldn't make the videos. And it was terrifying because I realized just how close these people really are to not only myself, but to everyone else, and what they do to hinder movements. And they've been doing this for such a long time that it's actually quite terrifying when you think about it, because this goes back even to the Black Panthers and Martin Luther King, and they've got a lot of practice at this, I would imagine. So with that being said, I'm going to give up the microphone. It's a pleasure meeting you, and I'm sure we'll chat again another day, Colonel, and I'll continue listening in silence. Thank you.
Sure. Alfred, did you have something?
Hey, Colonel.
Hi.
Great space. So, you know, something I've noticed about, and this has to do with the technical issues, not to change the subject, anything like that, but I've noticed that in the beginning, there tends to be like syncing and buffering issues. Like from my end, what I hear is, you know, your voice will cut out and then it'll come back in and it'll repeat what it said, or it'll go out and stay out, like there'll be just dead space, and then it'll come back. And so it's like syncing, like the syncing isn't working right. So two things. One, maybe, I don't know if it's possible to try to connect the space, maybe, because after about 10 or 15 minutes, it goes away, is what I'm seeing. And so I'm thinking it may be just, you know, maybe if it's possible to connect the space a little earlier to see if you can get things more syncing better on your side. But the other thought is it could be causing issues as people enter the room, because after about 10 minutes or so, people stop entering, 15 minutes or so, and I notice, you know, everything's fine.
No, it isn't. Actually, today I actually spent the whole time down below. And even up until the time I got to co-host the speaker, I still was having major cutouts, major blocks that I couldn't hear.
Right, like when you come up, like so I know I've like when I've asked for the mic in the past and come up, I've had to like reconnect a couple times. But what I've noticed, like and those are sort of intermittent glitches, because I think that it's a pretty crappy software. But what I notice, like every day, it seems like as people are coming in the room in the beginning, you know, Colonel's voice will drop out, and then it'll actually repeat, right? Like that tells me it's not just like something like dropping packets or whatever. It's more like something's not syncing properly, right? So as people are coming in, it's syncing new people. I don't know technically, but that's what it seems like, if that makes any sense. I don't know, maybe if that's the case, I don't know if there's much we can do, but I know once everyone's in the room, you know, I can hear things better, and I'm assuming that's the same for other people too.
Well, what's interesting about all of this is that I've been in quite a few other spaces, and I just don't recognize them having the same kind of issues. And I don't know why that is. I had someone else say the other day, oh, well, don't do it on your Wi-Fi. Well, I've done it both on my Wi-Fi and not on my Wi-Fi. Like I'm not on my Wi-Fi right now. And we still have the issues. So.
But you're using a Starlink, right?
I am.
Or do you? Yeah. So, you know, it might not be Wi-Fi or not Wi-Fi as the medium, and maybe the actual ISP. And it, you know, there's some variable.
But Alfred, it doesn't do that. My same hookup, I use the Starlink to get on everybody else's space, and everybody else's space works fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in a position to properly troubleshoot it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like I've been on spaces, like I've talked to Alpha about this too. You know, he co-hosts a lot of people's spaces. He's like, I've never, and he's come in here a couple of times. He says, I've never seen anybody have as many problems as you do. And he says, I'm in spaces all the time. Go ahead, SR71.
And the recording is clear. That's a big tell on this. The recording, when people come back to listen to it, is completely clear.
Yes.
There are no glitches.
It's clean.
It is clean. All of the recordings are fine.
That says a lot. That says that, you know, it is. Yeah, I mean, I noticed issues in the beginning more, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
SR, yeah. Thank you, Alfred. SR71, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank you all for attending our session today. Really appreciate it. We always like the input and the questions. Lots of good questions today. One of the things I wanted to bring up real quick, Colonel, is you did mention they give away themselves in these memoirs sometimes, and I was wondering if this was not an act of contrition on their part. And the other thing that struck me very early on, you talked about U.S. courts and us suing other countries for recompense and actions like that. And it struck me that that's exactly why we're not in the ICC.
Yes, it is. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Great observation. Sainted, go ahead.
So just on a side note, Colonel, there was two things that kind of struck me as unusual about your space, because it did jump like that. I'm familiar with that because doing a lot of the videos and listening to that gentleman who was the whistleblower, it kind of made more sense to me. His statement also said that he was trying to discourage the influencers with, throttling. He used words like that. Muting, he used words like that. So in real time and on real devices. So I'm wondering if, and I've seen it before, but your show, they seem to be targeting your show and your program in order for people to be discouraged. So I would have to, I started my phone, I restarted it, I jumped in and off the link. So I know that it should have been clear because I've never had any problems with anybody else's space.
I know. That's why
it seems to me as though the CIA guys are looking at your show going, you know what? We don't want her talking. We don't want her message getting out there because it talks about them.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that there is something very weird happening with our space. But I also have it live on Rumble as a result of the shenanigans here. And so a lot of people will have both the show up here so they can raise their hand and talk to us, which is why we came over to X in the first place. We used to only do them on Rumble and we just basically interacted in the live chat. But I do like the fact that we can, talk to each other over on X. And so we kind of left Rumble except for special programs and came to X, but now we're doing both every single day because they will listen on Rumble and they're able to hear all of the audio, but then they can still raise their hand and interact with us over here on X. So we are resilient if we're nothing else. My middle name in the military was persistence. They will not defeat us. So
I love it. Also, just a quick question about the Sean Ryan show. If you want to go there with that question, I would be very happy to get your thoughts. I did I understand that there's probably a lot of things going on, movable parts in any show, but what were your thoughts on that show yesterday?
I think it's great that they did it. And as I said earlier in my video, the only reason that they had that show is because the people demanded it. There were so many open-ended questions about the material that they presented that they can no longer present material and move on to their next show. The people looking at the material have learned how to research and how to speak out, and they now have big enough audiences that when they speak out, it demands addressing. And so to me, the biggest takeaway out of all of that was the fact that they had to even have that space. Now, it's kudos to them for doing it. But the fact that they had to do it in order to maintain their credibility is big kudos to everyone here, because we are not sitting by and allowing them to force feed us bullshit anymore. We are going to research every drop of information, and it will either be verified through our filters or it won't. And when it's not, and we have questions, you need to come back to us with answers. If you don't have any answers, then just say you don't have any answers.
And a final question, just a final one while I have you. And it's, I did drop the link in the messages here, and it was in regards to Sarah Adams' interview in which she stated and was talking about the Kashmir War and the influence of the CIA within Pakistan, Kashmir, and India. And it seemed to me as though what she was stating, and like you're saying, that the accountability and the audiences are gaining much more information and are asking many questions that they never did before, and I think it's a great thing. And that's the accountability that I do love. And so in that clip, she was actually talking about how the CIA was funding certain individuals, and then also those individuals within organizations. And she did mention Taliban, and she did mention Al Qaeda. So with that being said, so you have a CIA individual telling everyone that they're funding literal terrorist organizations. Your thoughts?
So she blocked me, by the way. I'm not a fan. I told her
that.
Yeah, I told her I was not a fan. Because for a couple of reasons. She tells you some of the truth. She doesn't tell you all of the truth. So the CIA is not funding individuals in these organizations. They are funding the organizations, and specifically in Pakistan, we have funded for the last, 40 years, the ISI. And that is their lead intelligence organization. We have funded many government intelligence apparatuses. We funded the terror training camps that were set up in Pakistan because of our funding of ISI. Pakistan set up a whole bunch of heroin processing labs because of the opium fields in Afghanistan. So we go in Afghanistan and we coup that government. We overthrow that government, and we did it because we were moving all of the opium production out of the Golden Triangle into the Golden Crescent. And we have moved the major opium production facilities around under the guise of the CIA. And she never talks about any of this, but the CIA's drug trafficking apparatus, which is basically worldwide, was set up after World War II using Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan. This is very well known. And they did it because Paul Helliwell during World War II is the military attaché to Chiang Kai-shek, who was trying to get the Japanese out of China. And Paul Helliwell's watching this guy basically support his military by selling opium. And, he contacts Alan Dulles and he goes, hey, I got a great idea. After the war's over, let's us do that. We can kind of corner the market over here. We'll take care of Chiang Kai-shek, set him up in luxury over here in Formosa, now called Taiwan. And he can basically run the entire operation for us. And we will use the profits off of that, which ended up being trillions of dollars, to fund Operation Gladio and all of our stay behind, our paramilitary, and everything that's off the books. And that basically is how this whole thing got started. So when she says that the CIA is not corrupt, I think everything I just said was very corrupt. And she also, if you go back in her feed, talks about the fact that, having cavity searches when you get on an aircraft is for your own good and it's for the safety of everybody. knowing damn good and well that we're bringing completely unknown people into our country, sticking them on the airplane right next to you as they walk by and smile at you, getting your body cavity searched. So the arrogance and the audacity of someone to say, you have to submit yourself to your government, but we are going to bring these complete strangers in, and we're not worried about their being terrorists. We're only worried about you being a terrorist. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's all bullshit. And so when I did provide her with the corrupt, to include setting up the BCCI Bank, Nugent Hand Bank, using the Vatican to money laundering, I'm 72 books into this. I got all of this. I know just how freaking corrupt they are. I can recite it by memory. I can tell you the people that they bombed, who they used to bomb them, where all of the cells are, what they were called. And so you cannot tell me that the CIA is not corrupt. And anybody that has been in the CIA and does not acknowledge the fact that they have done all of these things, but they instead block somebody, as far as I'm concerned, she's still CIA. All along, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, Colonel. I think that definitely, given everything we've heard today, my conclusion, at least, is that the reason we're having these problems in terms of reception on your, oh God, hold on a second. Sorry, hello? 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 Oh.
All right, let me mute his mic while he takes his phone. SR71, go ahead.
Yeah, Colonel, what I really want to add out of all of this, and why I believe this space in particular is targeted, we deal with one subject and one subject only. We don't deal with everything else that's happening across the board. We deal with one subject. We can talk about the other things, but when it comes down to what you really want to know,
right?
CIA is the cornerstone of what's going on here.
Correct.
And it will always be. And I'm with you. The other thing I want to say, folks, if you didn't know this yet, the Colonel did finally put out some Gladio t-shirts. I know, I ordered my own already. They're on back order. They won't get here till the 30th, but I wasn't going to miss out. So if you're all looking for some Gladio stuff, it's finally here.
So let me let me just say this, because thank you for reminding me, SR71. I always forget to do the important stuff. Not that I'm just teasing. I know my daughter asked me, she says, Mom, did you say anything about it on Friday? And I said, no, I forgot. I got so much important stuff to talk about, and t-shirts isn't in that list. So, all right. So we've had lots of people ask for stuff like that. We will get Gladio glasses. I promise you we were going to get those. So basically, we have been pleasantly surprised at how many people got on right away and ordered t-shirts. So we are going to be able to place the order early, earlier than we thought, because of you guys' overwhelming response to getting your first t-shirt. And once we get the first t-shirt ordered, we are going to send to them, because she has the lady that's helping us at this. This is a veterans owned local t-shirt place that has higher quality t-shirts. These are not China made. They're not done in a different, every single thing that we're doing is done locally and with veterans. So I just want to say that too. So I'm so excited about this, but I am telling you guys, I want pictures posted of you guys wearing the t-shirts. That's kind of my my semi requirement, is I want to see those on you guys, and I'm just thrilled at the response to this, and look forward to getting a few more out there on the store. But my favorite thing is going to be the coin. So we're still finalizing the back side of the coin. So if you look at the t-shirts, the emblem that's on the pocket has both the little compass rose for the CIA and the one for NATO. That's what those two things are on each side of the eagle, with the gladio sword, which is short sword, in his talons. And so the eagle, which is me, because that's the emblem for Colonel, is actually taking Gladio by the talons, and we are going to destroy it. That's kind of the whole motto of that coin. But we're working on the back side of that. And then once we do that, that will be our challenge coin for all of us Gladio enthusiasts to be able to use. So all along, go ahead. I see your back.
Yeah, sorry about that. Colonel, let me try to be short and sweet for the first time since 1963. The folks who got assassinated were left liberals. I know there's problems with left and right. And I'm going to ask folks to put that on hold for a second. I agree with half of it is bullshit. Okay, but what really scared, I think, the CIA about that is, A, they had the groups of people, the coalition behind them to actually have the gunpowder to make a boom, and they were directly targeting CIA at a time when no one really said CIA yet, because it was too early to know, what was going on, because it was an earlier stage and like blah, blah, blah. Okay, stage 2, the CIA creates a fake left to criticize the assassinated left liberals, to make the fake leftist think that assassination don't matter. What did the fake left censor more than anything else? Exactly what you're talking about right now. So you have these foundation-funded, what I call McLeftists, like Noam Chomsky, like Amy Goodman, who's funded by the Ford Foundation, literally, right? Talking about all of the left crunchy things, but it's not talking about this. It's only talking about CIA and very esoteric, very far away, with absolutely no Gladio aspect to the CIA.
Right.
And now, after the McLeftists had so totally killed the left by making it only talk about, like, people who say neoliberalism, which is a deliberate attempt to create anti-populists, right? Only like super educated people who sound snotty and they're going to make everybody want to fucking kill them, say neoliberalism to each other, so it will never matter. And but they sure are good at preventing the Democrats, at covering the Democrats exactly at their most vulnerable point, their complicity with CIA. And very importantly, they do that while seeming, the most important word in politics, seeming to be criticizing the Democrats from the left so they can gain credibility, which is all bullshit. So now the Democrats are protected by the fake leftists. Oh, what a surprise, on the area of CIA Gladio stuff.
Right.
And now you are doing it, people on the so-called perceived mediated right. Again, that takes a couple of asterisks, but I'm asking to bear with me for a second. Is they're talking about the deep state. It's there's going to be some fuzziness there for a while, because like people are just getting up to speed. It's not necessarily the fault of any one group. It's that both groups have been yo-yoing this shit. You squeeze a balloon, and what's not on your left-hand side is the air's move over to the right. And so now people on your show are finally starting to hear real stuff, footnoted stuff about Gladio aspects of CIA, and the CIA is not having it.
I agree.
So I think they're definitely messing with the space for that reason.
I agree. Carrie, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. Hi. Yeah, just to bounce on what he just said, I actually worked at Democracy Now! And Amy is a fucking union buster, and I had a lot of problems with her. She's a Harvard graduate, man. And she's just a psyop, totally. Okay, so I have a question about the shirts, and I'm going to be a bitch. Are they cotton?
I don't think they're 100% cotton. I'll look. This is really my daughter's thing. But I'll look. And I will let you know. I will post about it. I saw Bridget put the link for the shirts down in the chat bubble. So thank you, Bridget,
Yep.
for doing that.
And, right.
Thank you,
Amazon
honey.
does on the Ultratron.
You're welcome, Carrie. Thank you for asking. And once we get a couple different versions going, if this one is not 100% cotton, we will do one because I do know that's very important for some people. All right, Trump Frog, what's up? He must be working, just listening. Okay. So we are going to have a space tonight at 8 o'clock for Trump Frog. So I will be on his space at 8 for anyone that wants to join us. Anybody else have anything for us? Oh, look at Bridget putting it up there. Yay! With our cool glasses. Yeah.
I did buy one. I just want to
You're going to complain.
that I did buy one.
Okay. Well, thank
but
you.
Only one because I didn't know whether it was cotton or not.
Okay. But that's a good point, Carrie. I do need to put the what the material that it's made out of because I do know people are sensitive to that, and I'll get my daughter to update the website with that information. So thank you. I've never done anything like this, so we're just all learning together. So thanks for that input.
Yeah. Also, there's a thing about it can be cotton shirts that are made in America. It's a whole big fabric. The whole fabric thing is a huge ordeal. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I don't see any more hands, and I don't think Trump Frog's in a place where he can talk. So, oh, there you go. Okay. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, except for that I'm working, but I'm grateful for work. But just wish I was off already, you know?
So 8:15 tonight.
Yep.
Okay.
And what a glorious day. President Trump was certified today. No drama except for the snowball fight in front of the Capitol. Oh, it's exciting times. I think people should be really excited.
Yep. It
And
is.
the next 14 days will be wild.
It's going to be wild. Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, I'm looking forward to the space tonight. Ready to rock and roll.
All right. Awesome.
8:15 East Coast time, right?
8:15 East Coast time.
I put it down on the pill, I believe.
All right. All right, everybody. I'm going to jump off here. My daughter just showed up. You guys have a nice dinner and come back at 8:15 and we'll pick up this conversation with Trump Frog. I appreciate everybody here. Thanks, everybody. Awesome. Came just in time.
Oh, I thought you were doing a show.
I was.
Oh,
I just got off.
Oh, nice.
How are you?
Good.
Hello.
I saw this like, has there well, I'm thinking what they're so good. They're so good. They're cool. I think these are Anaheim peppers. I saw some like pepper grit the other day. Yeah, these. Oh. the one, and then there's like 7 of them. The one of them are red. Really? Yeah. Haven't done too much research, but the one that, oh, okay. And, this. Lifesaver, thank you so much. I'm wondering, that these, I don't usually catch people. Yeah. I don't even buy trash bags anymore, it's just these. That is one downside. It's like, trash bags to me, so I'm like, how have you been, other things? Yeah. we're going to set up a store. Come get your treat. On your bench, Dawn. Looks real good. Good boy. React. Here we go. Well, oh my goodness.
Oh, taste this.
Oh yeah.
That's a different brand, but
Oh, okay.
I love them. Oh, taste this. This is even better.
I love these. They remind me of that chocolate stuff you used to get.
Yeah. Oh shoot, I forgot to turn off my